Hey, Earth Skills crowd. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cali Janae. I'm a clinical herbalist and a botanist, and I practice herbal medicine mostly in Ithaca, New York these days. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'll just go over a brief bio of myself as an herbalist. I studied ethnobotany and botanical medicine is my background, and I currently work at the Northeast School of Botanical Medicine, and I practice as a clinical herbalist at the Ithaca Free Clinic, as well as seeing clients on a sliding scale basis in my own private practice, where I'm working on specializations in women's and queer health, harm reductions, and mental health. I grow and make herbal medicines and herbal products under the label Profound Existence. And I also teach classes in herbal medicine. I've been teaching at Florida Earthskills Gathering for the last few years, as well as teaching as faculty regularly at the Academy for Five Elements Acupuncture in Gainesville. I teach botany for them, and teaching also as faculty at the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery in Gainesville, and I do an herb workshop for that school. The class that I'm going to do today is going to be on herbal preparations. So basically just different types of herbal medicine, different ways that herbal medicine can be used and taken. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a slideshow to go along with this presentation. All right, herbal preparations. Here on the first screen, I have my contact information. This class is free, but if anyone would like to make donations to me or my practice for this class, you can do so at my PayPal, which is through this email right here, Cali_Janae@yahoo.com. If there are any questions about this presentation, also feel free to email me any questions that you may have to the same email address. You can find me on Facebook, calicarpet.americana, or I'm under the name Cal Janae, and I'm also on Instagram at Profound Existence Herbs. And I'll put the screen back up again at the end. All right, so the first way that we can use herbal medicines is as whole plants, whole herbs. And there are several different ways of using whole herbs. Those are fresh plants, the most straightforward, dried plants, also very straightforward, probably one of the main ways that herbs have been used historically. Powders, capsules and tablets, and poultices. And here we have a photograph of a whole herb. These are elderberries, Sambucus nigra. Elderberries are primarily used for their immune stimulating and antiviral properties. There's a lot of research. There's some research on them that shows them being effective for the influenza virus specifically. Often people take them if they think they've been exposed to the flu or other respiratory viruses, or if indeed they do come down with the respiratory virus. So the research shows decreased duration of the flu specifically. All right, fresh plants. And here I'm talking about using fresh plants dietarily as a food or a spice. And the question I want to pose is, when is this the best way to use a plant as medicine? This is ideal if the plant grows abundantly around you or is widely available in stores or from local farmers. So in North Florida in the winter, chickweed, which is a cool living plant, is very abundant. Stellaria media is the genus and species of chickweed. And so the winter time in North Florida is a great time for chickweed to be a regular part of one's diet. And another example in terms of something that's widely available locally from local farms in North Florida is turmeric rhizomes. So if you live in North Florida, turmeric is something that can be used fresh, unlike living in other places in the United States where you might be using turmeric more dried or powdered. And I meant to say at the beginning, I just had a baby a couple weeks ago, so you may hear calyx crying in the background. Other reasons to use fresh plants or ideal places to use them are when with herbs that can be easily incorporated into smoothies. For example, ginger, which is pictured here on the slide, Zingibera officinalis is its genus and species, and turmeric rhizomes. Both are really great additions to smoothies. So if you do a smoothie on a daily basis, that's a good way to get those herbs into your diet. And then there are lots of other herbs that could be good in smoothies as well. And one of the benefits of using fresh plants like this is that dietary approaches to health should be absolutely foundational. In that sense, everything that we eat that's a plant could be considered herbal medicine. Dried plants, and here I'm talking about using them as a whole plant. So this is going to be as an ingredient in food or as a spice. It can be difficult to get medicinal dosages of dried plants in food form, owing to recipes and then the flavors and textures of those plants. And it can also be really difficult to maintain. So compliance might not be good for an herbal medicine that someone may need to take in a certain dosage on a regular basis. So, an example of that is like, sometimes people will say, oh, I'll just put turmeric powder in my food instead of taking it in a more like medicinal extract kind of way. But I rarely see that be successful for people in the long term, because what happens is they're like, I'm so tired of everything tasting like turmeric. I just don't want to eat the same thing every day. So that often can come up as a problem when you're trying to use that dried plants this way. Where dried plants are really great though medicinally is in soups, stews, stocks, and broths. So the picture here on this slide is of a bone broth made with dried burdock here, turkey tail mushrooms, reishi mushrooms, and astragalus root. And then there are some whole foods that are also considered medicinal that are great as dried foods. And an example of that would be shiitake mushrooms, which are often dried. You find them very commonly in Asian grocery stores and markets. Shiitake is Inonotus obliquus, it's genus and species. And shiitakes are just reconstituted with water or added into a broth, for example, and then eaten whole. The next form of whole plant medicine are powders. Powders, there are, part of what I'm going over here with each different preparation is kind of the benefits and the negatives of each form of medicine. So things to consider when you're choosing how to take a medicine. Powders. So powders break down really quickly because they're so broken up into little particles. They oxidize very quickly, and other changes to the chemical constituents in the plants can occur because of how broken down they are. There's also often no way to know how old they are when you purchase them, and that can be a problem because they break down quickly. Knowing that they're fresh is essential to know that you have a really strong, effective medicine that you're going to be using. And then one thing about powders that really gets under my skin as a botanist is that there's no way to verify what a plant is, that a plant is what it claims to be when you get a powder, because you can't look at it and see like, oh, I can tell like that this had sagittate leaves, which, or like a certain type of flower on it, which you even can often tell with a dried plant that's not powderized. You can kind of see the like little bits and like do a little botanical detective work to verify what it is. There is a way to verify that a plant is what it claims to be with powders, and that's through genetic analyses, but you need a lab to be able to do that. So it's really inaccessible for most people who are going to be using herbal medicine, even for most herbalists who don't have access to labs, myself included. Powders are also pretty difficult to DIY. So making powders, unless you have like industrial equipment like a hammer mill, can be really hard. Or like even, you know, like for a home scale, you would need to get like special grinders or special blenders that could be very expensive, cost hundreds of dollars. And then if you're doing that method on top of grinding them, then you have to have series of screens in order to screen out larger chunks and get that like a really fine powder grade. So it's a pretty complicated, expensive process to make powders on a home scale, and just very impractical for most people. Just taking powders straight up, for a lot of people, compliance with that form of herbal medicine can be a problem. But how they're taken, that's what I mean here by method of ingestion, how they're taken can really make a difference. So if you try to take a powder mixed with water, it's going to be much harder to choke down than if you mix it with something that more has the texture of food. So when I recommend people to take whole powders, I usually recommend that they mix the powder, the dose of powder, say it's like a teaspoon of powder, then they mix that teaspoon of powder in with a little bit of yogurt, stir it up, and take that as a bite. It goes down much easier. Or if someone doesn't do dairy for whatever reason, mixing it with a little bit of applesauce also has the same effect. And probably the harshest way to take a powder is to just stick the whole powder in your mouth and try to swallow it or wash it down with water. That's going to be the hardest way to take a powder straight up. Powders are the best form of medicine for some plants. For example, milk thistle, Silybum marianum, is really great in powder form because it's a seed, Silybum, and the medicinal constituents in milk thistle, which are thought to be lignans, are really poorly extracted in like alcohol, and maybe somewhat better extracted in water, but it takes a cooking process called a decoction, which we'll discuss when we talk about water extracts of plants, in order to get those constituents out. So really like consuming the whole seed is the best way to take milk thistle, but the seeds have a really hard seed coat on them, so you can't take them whole. They'll just pass through your digestive system. Your body won't be able to break them up, and they're like too hard to like chew up or eat like you would a sunflower seed or something. They're way too hard, so you like even just eating them, they're not palatable. So a powder is really the best way to take that medicine. And there's a bunch of plants like this where powder is the best way to take them. It's especially true for adaptogens, plants in the adaptogen category, which is somewhat of a complicated category of herbal medicine, and I'm not going to go into that right now, but things called adaptogens, and nutritive plants. So that means herbs that you're taking particularly because they're very like mineral rich or have a high nutritive quality. So an example that would be nettles. And plants where starches are the medicinally active constituents. And that again is because starches are really poorly extracted in alcohol extracts like tinctures, and take like a cooking process in order to extract the starches. And So similar to what I said about milk thistle. An example of a plant that I use a lot as powder in my practice is burdock root. And the reason why I use burdock root as a powder is because I'm often using it for its inulin content. Inulin is a non-soluble starch. That means that it's a starch that our body doesn't break down. It makes it intact into our colon, where it's worked on by bacteria, and that's a good thing. So the beneficial bacteria in our colon eats inulin, and it helps to build a better microbiome in our gut. So I'll often give burdock root powder to clients who have been taking antibiotics for a long period of time, and maybe their gut flora has really just been like wiped out because of that. The next form is capsules and tablets. So capsules and tablets, these are more like pills, and that means that they're really good for compliance. So because of the society that we live in, a pill form of medicine is often what many people are used to taking for medicine. And if you can, especially for people inexperienced with herbal medicine, if you can give them a form of herbal medicine that's very similar to something they're already used to taking, that can really help them be able to maintain taking an herbal medicine on a regular basis. The downside, some of the downsides of capsules and tablets, though, are that they're expensive to purchase, and quality is often an issue, especially if you're purchasing them from convenient sources, like capsules that you can just go to like a pharmacy and buy, like a Walgreens or like a Walmart even. The kinds of capsules that you're going to be able to get there are probably really low in quality. There's no way to know how long they've been sitting on the shelf. So they have the same problem as powders. There's no way to know if how long they've been powderized, but then that process is even longer because they're processed again into capsules, and then they sit on the shelf again. So often the quality is going to be really low, and there's definitely cases where encapsulated herbs are not what they claim to be. So that issue that we have with powders is also an issue with capsules as well. The best way to do capsules, in my opinion, is to encapsulate them at home, or for myself, like as an herbalist, I'll encapsulate them for my clients so I can pass on the affordability to my clients in that way. It's time consuming, but it makes them much more affordable, and you can really guarantee the quality if you do encapsulation yourself, because you can know where you get your powder from, that you're getting it from a reputable source, that it's not going to be several years old. You have a good idea of knowing what the plant is if you know where you're sourcing it from. So that's really the way to do that. One of the other major downsides to capsules, though, is that because they do come in that pill form, the relationship that a person taking that herbal medicine is going to have with that plant is very much diminished, because it's so many steps removed from being a whole plant. So that is something to consider, but that's the right form of medicine for some people. All right, and then our last form of whole plant medicine is a poultice. What a poultice is a fresh or dry plant. If you use a dry plant, you have to add water. It's mashed up and applied directly, and that's a topical application. It can be applied with or without gauze. And it may be used with the addition of a hot water bottle on top of the poultice. So places where we might use a poultice would be for wounds, or for soft tissue injury, or potentially like that would be like a sprain or strain, potentially a broken bone, although it's probably not really the be all and end all answer to that. Let's see, bug bites would be another great place. So a lot of people are familiar with poultices as a spit poultice. This is like where you take a plant, chew it up, and put it on a bug bite or a wound. So you can do this probably only with your own spit to your own wound, or with your own spit to the wound of a person you already share bodily fluids with, although that's still not ideal because you do have bacterial content in your spit and you don't necessarily want your spit on someone else's wound. So this is something you will only do to yourself. If you're making a poultice for someone else, you want to make sure that you're doing it in a sterile manner with clean hands, and with, if you're using dry plant, using water, not spit. I have a picture here on this slide of goticola. So this is Centella asiatica. This plant grows commonly in North Florida. I think this photo here was taken in the Everglades. And it's a plant that I think makes a really good poultice. I think it's excellent at connective tissue repair and wound healing. Probably equivalent, my experience with it is I feel like it's equivalent to comfrey. If anyone's familiar with comfrey's ability to knit wounds shut, I think that goticola is a equally powerful medicine in that regard. I really like it as a poultice for wounds when it's available fresh. And one of the common names, so goticola is, it's an Asian name. I'm not sure what language it comes from, but the common name that you might hear it called in North Florida is spade leaf. And when I say you might use a poultice with or without gauze, that's going to be for a wound. And if you do it with the addition of a hot water bottle, that's going to be more for like if you have a soft tissue injury, or if you're trying to use a poultice for like pain relief. Maybe with like really tight muscles or sore back or something like that. Chamomile and ginger are herbs that might be used as poultices that way. All right, so moving on past whole herbs, we have the category of herbal extracts. What I mean by extracts is this is when we take an herb and use, the word is menstruum, some kind of menstruum, that means a liquid of some kind, to pull the chemical constituents out of the plant into that menstruum. And then we use that substance that's been pulled out of the plant rather than the whole plant as the medicine. And we have several different categories of herbal extracts. Water-based extracts. This is what commonly would be known as teas. We have alcohol-based extracts. There's actually several kinds. The one that more people are going to be familiar with are tinctures. We have glycerites, vinegars, honeys and syrups, oxymels, and oil-based extracts. So we'll start with water-based extracts. The photo on this slide is a digestive tea blend that includes meadowsweet, leaf and flower, calendula flower, and okra flowers. Colloquially, water-based extracts are known as teas. Technically speaking, a tea is a culinary preparation, though, rather than a medicinal one. When we talk about making water-based medicinal plant extracts, we have some more technical language that helps us separate how we're preparing the extracts from one another, because not all water-based herbal preparations are made the same way. The first type is an infusion. An infusion is when boiled water is poured over a dry herb or herbs, which are then allowed to steep before being pressed or strained. I say pressed because one of my favorite ways to make infusions is in a French press. An infusion is typically the best method of preparation for the aerial parts of plants, including leaves, flowers, and whole herbs. There are 3 different kinds of infusions that I want to mention specifically. The first is a standard infusion. So standard infusion is 1 ounce of herb per quart of water. This makes a strong medicinal preparation. It's the typical quantity of herb per amount of water that's used when making a medicinal infusion. An overnight infusion is an infusion that's allowed to steep for 8 to 12 hours before straining or pressing and then drinking. It's the best preparation for nutrient-rich herbs. For example, nettles, oats, and raspberry leaves. When these plants and other nutrient and mineral-rich herbs are allowed to sit in water for several hours like this, the minerals and nutrients are pulled out into the water a lot more effectively. And then the third type of infusion is a cold infusion. A cold infusion is an infusion that's prepared with room temperature water or water that's not been heated or boiled. It's typically allowed to steep for several hours, and it's the best preparation for mucilaginous, aka slimy herbs, such as marshmallow root. And that sliminess of a plant indicates the presence of what are called mucopolysaccharides. So that's complex starches that are mucky. That word, it's the same word as mucus. They're slimy. And that the job of that kind of slime in herbs is really to do the same job as our own mucus in our own bodies does, is to coat the tissue, coat our mucous membranes. So it coats the tissues of our digestive tract when we drink it, and also as such is tonifying, cooling, and anti-inflammatory for all of the mucous membranes in our bodies. And then cold infusions are also the best preparation method for fresh aromatic herbs. So an example of this would be a fresh peach leaf cold infusion. And then cold infusions can be combined with the overnight infusion method. So that means that you can boil water, pour it over a tea, and then let it cool down and sit for 8 to 12 hours. It's really that time that's required to pull out that kind of slimy consistency from herbs. So when I would combine the methods like that and use hot water rather than room temperature water or water that hasn't been heated, is when I have a tea blend that has both nutrient-rich herbs in it as well as slimy herbs. So those herbs can still be combined, and we can use a combination of methods to prepare the infusion. And we have the word infusion, instead of just saying tea, we have the word infusion to separate an infusion from a decoction. A decoction is a way of extracting constituents from plants where we boil the herb in water for a given amount of time in order to extract from that plant. So typically decoctions can be boiled for 10 minutes to several hours. A lot of them are like 10 to 20 minutes. Things that you would do for several hours are more starch-rich plants and medicinal mushrooms. And decoctions are really the best way to make water-based extracts out of roots, barks, seeds, I mentioned milk thistle earlier, and medicinal mushrooms. And this is because sometimes because of starch content is that this boiling time is needed to extract the starch content. That's the case with the oligopolysaccharides found in medicinal mushrooms. But also roots, barks, and seeds are just like woodier and tougher tissues of plants, and it really takes that cooking time to break them down a little bit and pull the constituents out of them. Also, anything where you're looking for the astringency or the tannins as the active ingredient in the medicine is going to really be something you want to decoct. You get that astringency out of a plant by decocting it. So we could talk about mint in this regard. If you make an infusion out of mint leaves, you get a really nice minty beverage. If you make a decoction, on the other hand, out of mint leaves, there's also tannins in mint. So a decoction made from mint, even just steeping mint tea for too long will do this, is you really pull out those tannins and you get a much more astringent, less pleasant mint tea to drink. However, if you're going for that astringent tonifying quality in the medicine, you might intentionally let your mint tea decoct or steep for longer if you need that quality in the medicine as well. And then our final type of water-based extract is a compress, which is also known as a fomentation. I tend to use the word compress. And this is the use of an infusion or a decoction topically. Typically, this is applied by placing a towel or a rag in the hot tea and then applying that towel directly to a wound or soft tissue injury or painful area. So it's a topical application. And then to make a compress even more effective, you can put a hot water bottle on top of a compress to maintain the heat for longer. And that avoids the messy step of having to put the towel, let the towel get cold, then put the towel back in the hot water, then put the towel back on the body. So you just have to mess around a lot less if you just pop a hot water bottle on top of it. And then the picture here on this page is a plant that we might make a decoction out of. This is Jamaican dogwood bark, used as an anodyne or a pain remedy. Pisidia piscipula is the genus and species. And this is a plant that in the United States is only found in the Florida Keys. All right, alcohol-based extracts. Technically, these are all hydroethanol extracts because there's no such thing as 100% alcohol. So every time we make an alcohol extract, we're also doing a partial water extract. That's what I mean by hydroethanol extract. So the first question is, why alcohol? Why do herbalists use alcohol so much to make medicine? Why is alcohol make such good medicines? There's a few different reasons. The first is that the chemicals in plants have a high level of solubility in alcohol. Not everything that's used as plant medicine is extracted in alcohol, but a lot of things are. Tinctures also make really concentrated medicines, so you can take relatively small doses of them. It makes it really easy to have like a store of medicine on a shelf. Because of the alcohol content, as long as the alcohol content is 30% alcohol by volume or higher, it's a shelf-stable medicine. Alcohol is also highly absorbable and very quickly absorbed in the gut, which makes these medicines not only just absorbable in general, but it makes them very fast acting. So they can be used for acute situations or in first aid scenarios. They also, alcohol extracts are also very convenient and can have a high level of compliance because of their convenience. It's easy to carry around a little bottle of medicine that's never going to go bad and be able to take it, I say never, lightly. Maybe like in 10 years it will go bad. But you know, that's like relatively never going to go bad. You have a little bottle, you can carry it in your pocket, so it's possible and convenient to be able to take the medicine several times per day if necessary. It travels well. That's as opposed to something like a tea, where you have to have a kitchen to make it, or some kind of cook setup. You have to be able to have the time in your schedule to boil water, wait for it to steep. You have to have the equipment to strain it. So that's just all these more steps involved in taking a tea every day versus taking a tincture every day. So because of those reasons, compliance is often much higher with tinctures. And again, for people who aren't as familiar with plants or plant medicine, there's just less involved in it. So what kinds of alcohol-based extracts are there? I've mentioned tinctures a bunch of times, so let me unpack what that means for anyone who doesn't know. A tincture is a plant or a plant part extracted in water and ethanol. And by ethanol, I mean ethyl alcohol. That's like our drinking alcohol. There's two main ways to make a tincture. The first is a Folk method. This is the Folk method of tincture making is when a plant is covered with alcohol. Usually vodka is used for aerial parts and brandy is used for roots, barks, and seeds. Making tinctures the Folk method is easy to do. It's accessible. Downsides to this method, though, are that medicines won't be as potent or consistent from batch to batch. In order to get potency and consistency when making a tincture, this is why we want to use ratios and percentages of alcohol for medicine making. What I mean by this is a weight to volume ratio of herb to menstruum. Generally, that ratio is going to be 1 to 5. I'm going to unpack what these numbers mean here. So that's going to typically be 1 to 5, 50% for dry plants, and 1 to 2, 95% for fresh plants. So what that means is when I talk about dry plants, 1 to 5, 50% is 1 part plant, 1 part herb by weight to 5 parts alcohol and water. That's what I mean by menstruum in this case. And then that menstruum is going to be 50% alcohol, 50% water. And that would be like 100 proof vodka is 50% alcohol. And definitely if people have questions about this, feel free to email me with them. It can be confusing, especially hearing it the first time. But again, 1 part dry herb to 5 parts of alcohol water combination at 50% alcohol. That's a general rule for a dry plant tincture. And then for a fresh plant tincture, 1 part plant by weight. And you're going to want to chop it up as finely as possible. Increasing the surface area increases the extraction of chemicals into the alcohol and water, makes the tincture stronger. To 2 parts, 95% alcohol. General rule for fresh plants. One of the problems that you might run into, especially in Florida, is that you can't actually purchase 95% alcohol everywhere. And that's okay. Most things you can make in a lower percentage of alcohol. In Florida, the highest percentage of alcohol you're going to be able to get is 76%. So when I lived down in Florida, I was doing a lot of my tinctures at 1 to 2, 76%. There are a few medicines that won't work for. Highly resinous plants, for example, like if you're trying to make a tincture of pine resin, you would have to get 95% alcohol in order for the resins to be able to be soluble. They're not soluble in water. So those are general guidelines for ratios and percentages for tincture making, but there are many variations depending on the density of the plant matter. So sometimes a plant is too fluffy to be, like a dry plant specifically is too fluffy to be able to make the tincture at 1 to 5. A good example of that would be mullein leaf. It's extremely fluffy. If you make it at 1 to 5, the amount of alcohol and water doesn't cover the plant, no matter how much you try to press it down and get it under the water level. So often, like when I'm making a mullein leaf tincture, it ends up being like 1 to 8 or 1 to 10. And that's just the reality of the fluffiness of the plant matter. So density matters. Also the constituents of the specific plants and other factors. And I'm not going to go into the how you want to make different medicines based on what constituents are in the plants. That's like a whole class in and of itself, but it's something that you can do research on if you want to dive deeper into tincture making. All right, this photo is a fresh turmeric rhizome tincture that has been blended. So blending tinctures is a good way to really increase that surface area and make sure as much of the chemical constituents from that plant get extracted into the alcohol as soon as possible. This photo, or as well as possible. This photo was taken literally minutes after making this tincture, and because it's blended, you can see already that the alcohol in water is bright orange. So that extraction is happening really rapidly because of the blending process. Other types of alcohol-based extracts. We have percolations. Percolation is a hydroethanolic extract that is gravity fed. They're made using powdered herbs, and they're arguably more potent than a tincture. That's definitely arguable, but that claim is made a lot. These are made using a percolator, which the percolators I've seen are typically made out of glass bottles, usually a Perrier bottle that's put into a stand. So it's like a funnel. The bottle's upside down. It's got the bottom sawed off. So it's like a funnel. And then that's packed full of powdered herbs. And then the alcohol and water is poured into the powder. There's a cork at the bottom of the bottle. And then that sits overnight. And then the cork is pulled out so that the menstruum flows through the powder. And that, the major benefit to a percolation as opposed to a tincture is that you can make an extract from a percolation in only 24 hours. So if you need a medicine, if you need an extract right away for a client, you can make these really quickly. Whereas with the tincture, I didn't mention this, but it's important with a tincture, you really need to let that medicine sit for 2 to 6 weeks. So after 2 weeks, if I need a medicine right away with a tincture, I can start pouring off the top. But really I want to let it sit for 6 full weeks before I like strain it or press it or decant it. That's the major benefit of percolations. A major downside to them is that you have to have the herb in powdered form in order to make them. It won't work with fresh plants. It won't work with dry whole plant matter or even dried cut sifted plant matter. It has to be a powder. What else do we have? We have fluid extracts. A fluid extract is a tincture or percolation made at a ratio of 1:1. These are arguably stronger than a tincture or percolation because of their higher weight to volume ratio. That point is also definitely arguable. The main argument being that because there's not as much menstruum being used, that it actually might not be enough liquid to pull all of the soluble constituents out of the plant. So there might be a lot of medicine left stuck in the plant matter. And then we have liniments. So a liniment is a topical application of hydroethanolic extract or tincture. And liniments are often, but not always, made with isopropyl alcohol. I tend to make my liniments with ethanol because then I can use it internally or externally. It just makes it a much more, like diverse use product. If you use isopropyl alcohol, you can only use that liniment externally. You can't take it internally because isopropyl alcohol is toxic internally. We have double extracts. A double extract is a decoction of a plant or fungi, and I say or fungi because this is the best way to make extracts out of most of the medicinal mushrooms. So a decoction of a plant or fungi preserved with a tincture of itself. The end product has to be 30% alcohol by volume or higher in order to be shelf stable. In addition to medicinal mushrooms, botanicals where starch content is one of the main medicinal constituents are also really good in double extracts. So examples of things you might make as a double extract would be reishi mushroom, that's Ganoderma species, Ganoderma lucidum, or lingxi is the one that's used classically in Chinese medicine. In the southeastern United States, the native species that's used medicinally is Ganoderma curtisii. And then another example that I really like as a double extract is astragalus. Genus Astragalus propinquus. And then the final type of alcohol-based extract that I want to mention is a succus or a succus. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I'm not sure which way is correct. But a succus is a juiced plant preserved with alcohol or with a tincture of itself. And examples of things that I might make into a succus would be prickly pear fruit juice, using the alcohol then to preserve it. And because prickly pear fruit juice is medicinal in addition to being edible. And cleavers, Gallium apirini. The reason to make a succus, the main reason to make a succus is because whatever that thing is that you're making a succus out of probably makes a terrible tincture. Like it doesn't extract well, or it's not strong, and the medicine's actually just more potent if you go ahead and juice it and then preserve it with alcohol. And then here at the right, we have a picture of mullein root tincture. This is for Bascom thapsus, and I just think this picture is really cool because you can see whatever these chemical constituents in mullein root are, I'm not sure, but they're actually turning blue when they hit the alcohol here. All right, glycerites. Glycerites are extracts made with glycerol, which is commonly known as vegetable glycerin. Glycerol is a colorless, odorless alcohol with a viscous consistency and sweet taste. It is a byproduct of industrial oil production. If you're using glycerin, you want to make sure you use vegetable glycerin because non-food grade glycerins are produced from petroleum processing. One of the things that is a major downside for me about making glycerites is that it's really difficult to find ethical and affordable sources of glycerol. Most of what's on the market for food grade vegetable glycerin is a byproduct of vegetable oil production. So corn oil, soybean oil, and palm oil, all of which are typically, corn and soy, high pesticide input. None of these are sustainably produced. But they're affordable. So then the problem with more ethically produced and organic glycerin, which are available, is that they're not priced affordably. So in order to make affordable medicine, it's like not ethically sourced. So that's a major downside for me about glycerin. I still use it somewhat, but it's not like something I hugely rely on in my practice. The major benefit to glycerites is that they're an ethanol-free herbal extract. So that means that they're suitable for people who don't consume alcohol for whatever reason. They're also suitable for diabetics in typical doses. Usually we're giving. So just without going into too much detail about it, glycerol doesn't spike blood sugar in the way that sugar does. It does cause blood sugar to raise, but it's in a much slower fashion. However, the small amounts, usually we're talking milliliters, maybe a teaspoon or tablespoonful, the small amounts that are used in medicinal dosages isn't enough to cause a significant blood sugar rise that would be of concern to someone who's diabetic. So they are suitable for diabetics. which is, you know, it's easy to question that because it's so sweet tasting. You think like, is this like sugar? And it's not like sugar. Compliance of glycerites sometimes could be higher for some people than tinctures because of the sweet flavor. A lot of tinctures just taste terrible. And then another downside is that glycerin extracts are not nearly as strong as alcohol-based extracts. So you have to adjust dosages, with the dosages of glycerites being higher than what you would dose a tincture of the same plant at. And this stylized photograph is making a lemon balm glycerite. And lemon balm is Melissa officinalis. All right, herbal vinegars. Vinegars are extracts made with vinegar. Vinegar specifically being acetic acid. You can use any vinegar, but apple cider vinegar is the most common. And I would just say, as someone who's made their own vinegar a bunch of times, I often have a lot of raw vinegar available. You have to be really careful when you're making herbal extracts with raw vinegar and fresh plants because they tend to go bad really easily. So I've just had so many herbal vinegars go off at this point that I just pretty much always pasteurize my vinegar before I make an herbal extract. They're just much more shelf stable that way. So when I'm making medicine for people, I want it to be shelf stable. Most plants don't extract well in vinegar. Major downside to this form of medicine. Major upside is that vinegar is also an ethanol-free form of medicine for people who can't consume alcohol for whatever reason. But there are some plants that make really good vinegars. So I tend to reserve this form of medicine for those specific plants. Plants rich in alkaloids, the chemical constituent as a group of chemicals called alkaloids, tend to be very well extracted in vinegar. And my favorite plant to make as an herbal infused vinegar is a lobelia vinegar. That's Lobelia inflata. Also, mineral-rich plants. Minerals are extracted well in vinegar, and also culinary herbs can make really nice vinegars because you can use both of those, for mineral-rich plants and for culinary herbs. Then you can use that vinegar in cooking. It will be, you know, flavored already, or just add extra nutritional quality to the food that you use to cook with it. And when I say mineral-rich plants, I mean things like lamb's quarter and nettles make really good culinary vinegars. And of course, pictured in the photo is fire cider, which is a famous herbal infused vinegar. It's a formula. Clearly, as you can see from the labels, it has many different ingredients. All right, honeys and syrups. A syrup is an herb preserved with sugar, and there are many different variations of making herbal syrups. One is honey infusions, which are often made with fresh plants infused into raw honey. When you're using a fresh plant, you have to be careful not to use too much plant matter in comparison to honey. If you get too high of a water content, the honey will start to ferment, and what it ferments into is mead. So that's not to say that making mead is a bad thing, but if you're trying to have an herbal infused honey, you don't want it to ferment into mead. You want it to be shelf stable, and honey pulls water out of plants, and that's why it extracts the medicinal constituents from plants so well. But unfortunately, I've never seen like a weight to volume ratio, or like a recipe to consistently use a certain amount of a fresh plant to honey that will keep it from going bad. And I think the reason that doesn't exist is because different plants just have different amounts of water in them. So you can't really standardize that. But if you use too much, the point is if you use too much fresh plant matter to your amount of honey, it will ferment. And I just have kind of gotten, it takes experience from my perspective. I've just kind of gotten a feel for like what's going to be shelf stable and what's not from making honeys a bunch of times. And unfortunately, that's the best answer I have for that. A syrup also could be a decoction or infusion with enough sugar added while the medicine is boiling or hot to make a shelf-stable syrup. And this is the way that syrups are typically made, like in European herbal medicine or in phytotherapy, which is the like official herbal medicine of England. If you refrigerate that kind of syrup, the shelf life is longer. You can take an infusion or decoction and add honey at a 1-to-1 ratio and refrigerate it, and you can maintain the life of that decoction or infusion much longer, and then take it, you know, you could like then take your tea daily in small amounts. The downside to that, you know, of course, is that it's not suitable for diabetics. Basically, all of these medicines, honeys and syrups, are not suitable for diabetics. Syrups are really good for cough medicine and sore throats. They're great medicine for kids and others who might have trouble with strong herbal flavors. Basically, all of the honeys that I make are like respiratory herbs or things that would be like antimicrobial for a sore throat. I do like wild cherry honey, bee balm or monarda honey, elecampane honey. That's a few examples of things I really like as honey. And then oxymels. So an oxymel is kind of a combination of the last two medicines we discussed. Oxy means vinegar and mel means honey. So this is a combination honey vinegar extract. A benefit to an oxymel is that they extract constituents that are soluble in water and acetic acid and in honey. So we have this like three-way extraction process going on. They're not nearly as strong as alcohol-based extracts. Dosages are typically in teaspoon and tablespoonfuls. Same goes for honeys and syrups. Using fresh plants and raw vinegar can lead to fermentation and decreased shelf stability. Again, something to look out for. I have a picture of elderberry oxymel in bottles here. When I make elderberry oxymel with fresh elderberries, it always ferments. It's delicious, and I'll do that for like my home elderberry medicine. But when I'm making products for other people or medicines for other people, I really want it to be shelf stable. So for elderberry oxymel that I give to someone else, I always use dried elderberries so that it doesn't ferment. Oxymels are absolutely delicious, you know, assuming the plant you're using isn't terribly bitter or awful tasting, which some plants are. But oxymels tend to be just like absolutely delicious, really good compliance. They have some culinary uses. You know, like I would put elderberry oxymel on ice cream in a heartbeat. They're great for kids or others, you know, same as syrups, who might have trouble with strong herbal flavors. Like syrups, they're great for coughs and sore throats. And the reason for that with oxymels and with syrups is because they're really coating. They just coat the throat. They're very soothing. The oxymels are also going to be high in sugar, not suitable for diabetic individuals. All right, and oil-based extracts. This is our last extract we're going to talk about here. An oil-based extract is an herb infused to a vegetable oil or an animal fat. There are many different methods of infusion. Fresh herbs can be infused into an oil, but they're prone to fermentation and mold growth. So it takes kind of a certain touch to do this. And I'm not going to go into the whole process of making a fresh plant oil in this presentation because it's a little bit just more complicated than what we have time and space for here. But it's something to be aware of. If you want to make fresh plant infused oils, do your research or talk to some experienced medicine makers. If you have questions about this, feel free to email me about it also. It does take a bit of care though. And because there's fermentation that happens in that oil with a fresh plant, the end product is suitable for external use only. The kind of fermentation that occurs with a fresh plant and oil is an anaerobic fermentation, which can create undesirable, unsafe to consume bacteria. So fresh herbs infused in oil, external use only. Dry herbs in oil need to be heat extracted, and there's a whole bunch of different methods for doing this. You can use a double boiler or a crock pot on warm, although crock pots tend to get a little hotter than I like. You can use a dehydrator, put the dry herb in a jar, cover it with oil, put the whole jar in the dehydrator and set the temperature. You can use a dishwasher similarly. You can run your oil through a dishwasher. Although I would want to be able to temperature control that. And you can also place your herb in oil in a sunny, warm location. And as long as I'm mentioning that, that's one of my favorite methods for doing fresh plant oil infusions, is to put them in the sun. And that seems to help prevent mold, especially on the surface. All right. So one of the things to consider, especially when you're doing heat extracted herbal oils, is that high heat and heat for extended periods of time causes oils to oxidize, which is rancidity. That's what makes oils go bad. And oxidized oils actually do damage to our tissue. So using a highly oxidized oil can be counterproductive to maybe the reason we're even using that medicine on our skin in the first place. So we don't want to use high heat or heat for extended periods of time. So using lower temperatures for infusion is the ideal scenario. If I am using a crock pot or a stovetop method where I can't set the temperature, I use a thermometer. And I don't tend to let my oils get over 120 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know, I've never seen any like research or guidelines about how hot you do or don't want them to get. I just kind of went with 120 degrees because it seems not that hot to me. So I'll tend to let something infuse for like a longer time at that lower temperature. And then we use, so now we're moving out of herbal extracts and just talking about other herbal preparations. So we can use our herbal infused oils to make salves and creams. A salve is an ointment that is made from an infused oil combined with a wax, typically beeswax. And this is done again on heat, ideally in a double boiler with a thermometer at a low temperature. And the wax melts into the oil and makes that oil thicker, and that gives us the consistency of a salve. Salves are for external use. They have many applications. And in general, oils are good for the skin and for our tissue healing and just like that general tissue state of the skin. Our skin is made up largely of oils, so that's kind of like the best form of medicine for the skin. They can be used like or used instead of lotions. They can be used for lip balms. They're great for scar prevention and wound healing. and almost any skin condition can at least, if not be, treated with a salve, could at least benefit from a salve because of the salve just aiding in the general tissue state, and then herbs being targeted to support a specific condition or just tissue regeneration. So that could be like a herpes simplex virus or psoriasis, or like really any skin condition could probably benefit from salve. And then soft tissue injury or pain. Typically, we want to avoid using salves in open wounds, especially deeper puncture wounds. But the reason for this is because that the oil of a salve is going to create an anaerobic environment again, and that anaerobic environment is a breeding ground for potentially harmful bacteria. So in an open wound, we don't want to put oil on it. Another place we really don't want to use salves or oils is on burns, because oil and salve is really warming and we don't want to bring heat to a burn. We want to cool down a burn. So oils and salves are also not appropriate for burns. The amount of wax used when making a salve changes the consistency of the salve. So the more wax, the thicker or harder the consistency. The less wax, the greasier or lighter the consistency. So we can really make a salve that's targeted towards the application it's being used for. If we use more wax and have a thicker salve, we create a barrier. Whereas if we use less wax and have like a greasier salve, we're going to have more absorbability into the skin. So a place where we might want a barrier would be if we're making a lip balm. So we want to protect the lips so that they don't get chapped. So we want that salve or balm to stay on the surface of the skin. So we might use more wax when we're making a lip balm versus if we're making an anti-inflammatory salve for a soft tissue injury, where we're really not, our goal in that case isn't to work on the skin surface itself, is to work below the skin at the inflammation caused by the injury. And so we want the herbs in the oil to absorb into the skin. So then we're going to want to use much less wax, have that absorbability factor. That's also a place where you could just use an herbal infused oil, so it will absorb more. But I just find that people really like salves over oils, partly just because they're so much less messy. In general, I think that a ratio of 1:5 wax to oil is a really good like general purpose salve. So that's a good starting place to then play around with. You can add essential oils to salves if you want to. And then a cream. I barely ever make creams. I'm just gonna like briefly mention it. A cream is like a salve, except that the oils are then emulsified with water. That's what makes it a cream. And I tend not to mess around with creams too much because they're much less shelf stable and require either refrigeration or the addition of preservatives like citric acid in order to not go bad. Typically, I think I mentioned that salves are typically made with beeswax. If you're looking for a vegan option for salve making, you can use Carnauba wax. All right, essential oils. Essential oils are distillable constituents of plants. Despite their name, they are not all oils, although some of the constituents that are distillable in plants are volatile oils. So it's a little bit of a misnomer to call them essential oils. Aromatherapy is the practice of essential oil-based therapeutics. I am not an aromatherapist. This is not my area of expertise. Essential oils may be used to target physiological health concerns. However, they are often used for psychological and mental health or energetics and spiritual healing. This works largely based on scent. Essential oils are highly aromatic. Oh, and that picture there. This picture here is an essential oil still. All right, essential oil safety. Essential oils should be used very conservatively internally, if at all. They should be used very cautiously on mucous membranes. So the reason for all of the safety and caution stuff is that essential oils are extremely potent. It might take pounds and pounds and pounds and pounds and pounds of a given plant to make a small, like 5 milliliter bottle of essential oil. So that just means that the concentration of that essential oil is extreme. It's very potent, exponentially more so than any kind of other extract that you would make, like a tincture. And it's going to be a much more select group of chemicals from whatever given plant that make it into the essential oil. So it's a more refined product. It's less of a whole plant medicine. And because the types of chemicals that are distillable into essential oil form are often volatile oils, they're very dispersive, which means that when you put them on tissue, they kind of can just pass through tissue because of their dispersive nature, which means that they don't stay locally. And that means that they can do harm to tissue. So that's some of the reasons to be really conservative or cautious when using essential oils. I often find recipes for like treatments for vaginal candida. That's what people call a yeast infection. Or like vaginal suppositories that have essential oils in them. And I'm almost always like, I would never put an essential oil in a vagina. I just wouldn't do it. It seems so harsh and so strong and unnecessary. There's just many more gentle herbal medicines that are so much more appropriate. And then that goes for like any mucous membrane. You just want to be really careful about using essential oils on any mucous membrane or internally. Your digestive tract being a huge mucous membrane. There are many contraindications of essential oils with pregnancy and breastfeeding. They should be used in pregnancy or breastfeeding only with medical necessity. Do not use undiluted essential oils. This is really important. There are a lot of aromatherapeutic practices that use undiluted essential oils as a mainstay of practice, and I just disagree with all of those approaches to using essential oils. I think that essential oils should always be used in a carrier substance. That carrier substance could be many different things. It could be water or tea. These are called spirits, sprays, or baths, are some of the ways that you might dilute an essential oil in water. When you put essential oil in alcohol or tincture, it's a liniment. For external use. There also could potentially be a tincture that you would put a tiny amount of essential oil in for internal use, but again, like really cautious, conservative use internally. The most common carrier substance for essential oils is oil. You can put them into salves. And then in terms of using undiluted essential oils, there might be a few exceptions. The only essential oil that I use undiluted ever is lavender. And that is because it's highly antioxidant, and I was just taught that it's safe to use lavender that way. But other than that, I dilute absolutely everything, and I still dilute lavender most of the time. All right, and then all essential oils should be used in moderation. That means not in huge quantities or dosages, and it means that you should, if you're using an essential oil over long-term use, you should consider not doing that or taking breaks from it, especially if it's internally. Right, and then I have a slide of this essential oil dilution chart that I made. So this is, you can use this chart to make a 1%, 2%, 3%, 5%, or 10% dilution of an essential oil, and it just tells you per amount of carrier. It says carrier oil on here, but that could be any carrier substance, alcohol or water. Per amount of carrier, how many drops of essential oil to add to get these different dilutions. So depending on the application, you might want a different dilution. And then anything over 10% dilution, I would consider to not really be safe. So that's where the chart stops. So if I want something really gentle with an essential oil in it, like I'm making a spray for sunburn that's really angry and irritated, and I'm gonna put some lavender essential oil in it as an antioxidant, I might go with like a 1 or 2% dilution so that it's just a really gentle, non-irritating spray for that really angry sunburn. Then if I was making a hand sanitizer, on the other hand, out of alcohol, and I'm using antimicrobial herbs, and it's only ever going to go on my hands, and I want it to be like potently antimicrobial, I might go with like a 5 or 10% dilution so that it's much more potent. If anyone would like a copy of this chart, I have this as a handout. Feel free to email me and I will send you a copy of this essential oil dilution chart. All right, the final form of medicine that I want to mention are herbal suppositories. I think herbal suppositories are really great, and I use them pretty, maybe not often, but at least a few times a year, give someone some suppositories. And I think it's just like an underrated form of herbal medicine. Big fan of them. They can be used for vaginal or anal insertion. Technically, they're called pessaries when they're used vaginally. Some vaginal applications for suppositories or pessaries would include infections, such as candida, that would be a yeast infection, or HSV, that's herpes simplex virus, that's inside of the vaginal canal. Irritated tissue, which might come as a result of an infection, or it could be from like mechanical means, like after birth, or from particularly rough intercourse. So for irritated tissue, or pruritus, which is itching, and cervical dysplasia. There could be other uses too. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. If you use herbal suppositories vaginally, you may want to use a pad or a panty liner because they will dissolve and come out of the vaginal opening. Anal applications of suppositories might be HPV, that's human papillomavirus, warts, HPV or other infections, irritated tissue, again, similar to the vaginal use. You can imagine how that might happen. You might use them with hemorrhoids, and you might also use suppositories in the case of BPH, that's benign prostatic hyperplasia, or other forms of prostatitis, which is inflammation of the prostate gland. Ideally, herbal suppositories are inserted after laying down at bedtime, And this photograph is a photograph of me making herbal suppositories here. And I use a gummy bear mold for my herbal suppositories. You can find many different shapes of silicone molds to make them out of. I just found that it's much more practical and affordable than buying like pharmaceutical grade suppository molds, which are also often, if not always, disposable. So you just create like a lot of trash using pharmaceutical suppository molds, whereas these silicone molds are reusable. So my friend calls these bummy bears when they're used as suppositories. Okay, so there's two main types of suppositories that I make. And I have recipes for these. If anyone would like those recipes, again, email me and I'm happy to send that handout to folks. The first recipe is oil-based and has cocoa butter in it. The cocoa butter is a super important ingredient because it keeps the suppository from melting as quickly, which means that the suppository is going to stay in contact with the tissue for longer. So benefits of oil-based suppositories is that they are vegan. They're especially good at being supportive of irritated and inflamed tissues. Again, because oil is good for the skin. Kind of that same idea of salves being good for the skin. Oil-based suppositories are not compatible with condoms or diaphragms as forms of birth control. That's kind of the same logic that oil-based lubrication is not compatible with condoms or diaphragms. And the other major downside to oil-based suppositories is that they dissolve quickly and stay in contact with tissues for a shorter period of time than vegetable glycerin and gelatin-based suppositories. So for certain applications, you really want the suppository to stay in contact with the tissue as long as possible. So the vegetable glycerin and gelatin-based suppositories, downside, they contain animal products, so they might not be suitable for someone who's vegan. They are compatible with all birth control methods, and they dissolve more slowly and stay in contact with tissues for longer periods of time. So if I was using a pessary or a suppository for something like prostatitis or for cervical dysplasia, even if someone was vegan, I would really try to convince them to use the vegetable glycerin and gelatin-based type of suppository, because in those cases, it's really important that the medicine stays in place as long as possible in order to be effective for those conditions. So those are the two main types of herbal suppositories. Again, I have a handout if anyone's interested in that. Shoot me an email. All right. Thanks for watching my presentation. I have a few resources listed here that I used for the presentation or that I recommend. This presentation is kind of a spin-off of a part of a class that I do for the Florida School of Traditional Midwifery. So a lot of the research that I've done for this presentation is based on that format. That is why my resources come from Botanical Medicine for Women's Health by Aviva Ram. So these two readings from that book, Botanical Preparation Forms and Formulating, are also kind of where I pulled a lot of this information from. Also, my favorite medicine making guide that I recommend is the Herbal Medicine Maker's Handbook by James Green. And then if a lot of my information on aromatherapy, because it is not an area of my expertise, comes from the book Aromatherapy and Herbal Medicines for Pregnancy, Birth, and Breastfeeding by Demetria Clark. All right, and then here is my contact information again, my email address, and if you'd like to make a donation to me for this class, feel free to do so via PayPal, which is under that same email. Again, you can find me on Facebook or at calicarpa.americana under the name Cali Janae, or or on Instagram at Profound Existence Herbs. I also just want to plug that I have an apprenticeship in Ithaca, New York, and I'm currently looking for herbal apprentices. My apprenticeship is potentially 3 to 4 days a week. It is 3 to 4 days a week. We can negotiate a schedule. It involves 1 day of assisting me and sitting in on consultations with clients at the Ithaca Free Clinic, and then 2 or 3 days at my home, working in my apothecary and on my farm and garden, growing herbs, making medicine, processing plants, filling orders. And that apprenticeship is a work trade model for education. So you would be trading the time of help of assisting me in my own practice for the experience of working clinically with me at the free clinic. You could also sit in on any consultations that I do in my private practice, and we also will make time to do classes in trade. And that's just self-guided, like whatever a student or apprentice is most interested in is what we'll talk about. And then you get also all of the hands-on experience of working in an apothecary, filling orders, making medicine, growing herbs, et cetera, et cetera. If you're interested in that apprenticeship, feel free, again, email me, contact me about that. And in terms of like a commitment or a length of time that apprenticeship would span, it's totally negotiable. We could work something out. So be in touch if you're interested in that opportunity. And again, thank you for watching this presentation. I am really missing earth skills right now, and for those of you who I did not get to see this year in Florida, I'm looking very much forward to next year.